Hello there, and welcome to week 7. We have come to the final 2 weeks of the course. It goes by quick, and you've learned a lot, so now it's time to put this all together. This week 7 research essay is a culmination of all the things that we have been learning since the first week of the course. So I don't want you to think of, oh, this is something completely new and different and disconnected from anything we've done, because that's not the case. We've been building on this from the very first week, starting with talking about the literary terms that we use when we are looking at text and using those for literary analysis. That is the focus of this essay, is literary analysis. So, week 1, we started with literary terms. We looked at sources in the GMC library that were written by experts in the literary field who knew the texts that we're talking about and the authors. So we looked at those as, critical writers, looking to see if those articles that you chose were reflective of what you felt about the story that you were reading. Then we also, and by the time we got to week 5, you started to develop a tentative thesis for this essay, using the text that we have already been talking about in the class. And then in week 6, you worked on the research for this essay in the annotated bibliography. So we've been working on this all along. So it isn't like we're switching gears and then going to write about something different. We're going to be writing about the stories that we have read in class. That is the number one thing that sometimes students get to this point and they see the word research essay and they start thinking about something that they may have done in English 102 where it was general topics and not literature based, or in other classes where they've done research. This research essay is about the stories we have read in class. Okay, so it's very important to remember that. So I want you to think back to all of the process that we have made so far. And now we're going to be putting this together for this research essay, which, by the way, is worth 20% of your overall grade. So it's going to be super important to put the effort into this and be able to get it completed so you can show the skills that you've learned and have a strong finish to the course. Okay? So I just want to reiterate the different requirements for this assignment. Of course, this is due at the end of week 7, and this is all of the skills that we have been doing in this course, and even some of the research elements that you started in English 101. Okay, so this is going to be, it's an argumentative paper, so you are making a claim about 2 or 3 of the literary works assigned in this class. So when you make a claim, if I say vanilla is the only type of ice cream that anybody should ever order, that is an argument. So you could come at me and say, no, you're completely wrong. And I would have to use some research about that. So I made that as a kind of a simplified example, but you're making some kind of an argument that somebody could come and oppose you. All right. So you're going to incorporate one of the literary theories that we've discussed in class. And remember, that comes from week 2, those specific literary theories. Because sometimes there's some critical theories out there, but they don't necessarily relate to literature. So you want to make sure that you're picking those from week 2. And you're going to be writing an essay of about 1,500 words or more. And just to kind of give you an idea, like a good solid paragraph is between about 100 to 150 words. So thinking about that. So you are going to be using 3 critical secondary sources that you have found through the GMC library, not a Google search, not Google Scholar, not any of those types of things. It has to come from the GMC library. If it does not come from that, I will not give you credit for that source. Okay? There are tons and tons of articles written about these stories. So I know that it's easy enough to find the stories or critical articles about those stories. I want to take a moment here to explain one thing. The stories that we're writing about are the primary text. The articles that you have chosen from the GMC literary databases are the secondary source. You're going to have both listed on your works cited page, okay? Because you're going to be pulling text evidence from the story itself, and you're going to be pulling text evidence from the secondary source that's written about the story, okay? So here are a couple of options. You have to focus on at least 2 texts no matter what you pick. They can all be from different authors that we have read in the class. So it must come from one of our literature courses or one of our literature selections. Or you can write 2 or 3 texts by the same author. We only have a couple authors that have more than one. So that would either be Sherwood Anderson or Langston Hughes. Those are the only 2 that have more than one text. So that kind of limits that. Most students do the first one where you're going to do 2 but no more than 3 from different authors, making that argumentative claim. Okay, so remember that the texts that we have read in class are pretty short, and that was for a reason. Since this is an accelerated class in just 8 weeks, you have time to go back and reread them. It is going to be really difficult to write this essay if you have not reread them, especially if you're picking some of the text from the beginning of the course. Okay, remember we decided on this topic in week 5. You did the research already in week 6, or at least some of the preliminary research. So that's your start. But you are considered a literary critic as well. And you found some of those sources of experts in the literary world. But that's up to you to say they may be completely incorrect of what you've learned. Okay? So your thesis has to be arguable and requires research to prove. Okay? So my example about vanilla ice cream is the only ice cream to choose would be arguable, but might not necessarily have the research. You already know that you're going to be looking in the GMC library to find literary articles written about these stories from the class. Okay? You're going to want to incorporate text evidence from those sources. You can either use direct quotes, you can use a paraphrase, or you can even summarize. But anything that you are using that is not an original idea of your own has to be cited. And so you want to make sure that you're using MLA formatting from the very beginning of the essay all the way through the end of the essay. And we already have lots of sources in there. We've talked a lot about MLA formatting. You also have sites like Purdue OWL, the online writing lab that you can use to help with that. And of course, you have free tutoring right here at GMC. So you can get your essay completed and get some feedback on that. And I highly, highly recommend, especially if you're not going to take advantage of the free tutoring, to have someone else critically read your paper and look for essays. If you don't have that, stand in front of the mirror and read your completed essay from the very end of the essay all the way back to the beginning, so you can hear some of those sentence errors or awkwardness that may pop up. Before you complete this essay, or even before you start really digging in and writing, make sure that you have reviewed the feedback that you have been given on the previous response essays. I've given lots of feedback about MLA formatting. I've given lots of feedback about thesis writing. I've given lots of feedback about either the sources that you may have chosen. So you don't want to keep making the same errors. It is perfectly normal for students to make errors, but if you're making the same one each and every week, then you're not really applying what you're learning. And it's really and I am giving that feedback specifically to students to be able to correct those by the time we get to this point. So I have that in mind when I'm giving you the feedback that if you make that error on this essay, it's going to be a little bit more costly to you. So you just want to spend the time really editing and revising your essay. This isn't going to be about the plot summary. We've already talked about the summaries in class. It's not going to be biographical about the author. So you kind of want to assume that we've already read it, which, you know, I am not really a reader of your essay. I'm the evaluator of your essay. But you want to, you know, consider, you know, someone who's reading your essay that they already kind of know the background of it. So you don't need to spend a lot of time in this essay talking about the background or plot summary type of thing, or the biographical information. Okay, so you want to organize your argument to maximize its effectiveness. Your thesis is going to include, your introduction is going to include the thesis, which is typically the last sentence of your introduction. That is, I'm going to look for that to be the last sentence of your introduction. And then each paragraph is going to be about a topic. So you want to make sure that you're using transitions and that each paragraph is focused on that topic sentence. And then, you know, finally, before you get to the point of turning in your essay, you know, making sure that your spelling is correct and your grammar and punctuation, and really giving yourself that time to look through that. Okay, there is the rubric. I tell students to think of this as the checklist because this is exactly what I'm going to use when I grade your paper. Okay, so look forward to reading these. Remember, you're only using the stories that we have read in this class. So it comes from, there is the reading list that's at the beginning of our course. Only those texts are permitted. If you decide to write on other things, it's going to cost you some points on the overall grade, and you don't want that. And only sources from the literary databases. So if you're going to write about the psychological literary theory, you can't just write about general psychology. It has to be an expert that's already looked at the psychological aspect of these stories. So all of the articles are going to be about these stories that you're writing about. All right, so as I said, looking forward to reading these essays, and we'll see you in class this week.